Hello friends, a little dark down here in the basement today. Maybe I should turn on a light. How's that? Ooh, a little sort of warmer. Maybe not as bright as we would like. Oh, not at all. Well, Gord's Poetry Show number 33. Here I am in the basement archives. A little cooler down here on this warm June day. And this is not vodka, this is water. And although this is something of a celebration of Billy Collins's work, I'm going to start with some Canadian poets, some contemporary Canadian poets, and see how you like that. Whoops, let's see if we can get that right. Ooh, not too bad. Jay Millar, Toronto poet, editor and publisher. His most recent book, I believe, Timely Irreverence, and a poem called Going Extinct. Really, I'd hate to be the pixels holding up that crappy video of you introducing your poetry, talking about the poetry of someone you love, or even your own poetry, never reading anything but discussing instead the interviews of yourself or the poets you have interviewed, and you are going on, and I don't mean to draw attention to that place no one really cares about, but I'm glad you do. The thing is, in a country where you are free to say anything, even the truth, the effect of that is no matter what anyone says, it has no effect whatsoever. Why is everything presented as though it means something? For instance, it's true that my visit to your fair city resulted in, among other things, my now fond memory of myself yakking into an antique toilet bowl. If I told you this poem is a distinguished lie, would it make you suspect anything about yourself? I wonder. Or about anything, period. Perhaps your ability to read this poem, or the tradition from which it springs, would be thwarted. Its imagined space among your thoughts suddenly melts. I hope not. This is, after all, just a poem. The rain falls on New Year's Day the same way it falls on any other day, but we want it to mean something else, something more. We bring that to the day, every day, to the self, through every selfless moment we encounter, rain or no rain, poem or no poem. But today it is New Year's Day, and it is raining, and as we walk through the mist coming up from the ice and snow choking the Humber, I realize that in a country where one is free to say anything at all, even the truth, the effect is no matter what you say, it has no effect at all. After all, this never was a poem. Not sure how to take that. Another editor and poet, I believe he lives in Montreal, and he might have moved. Carmine Starnino, from his book published by Gaspereau Press in 2009, This Way Out. Weeping Willow. More often than not, I'm not myself means I wake wearing yesterday's mood, a hand-me-down gloom that still suits. Life yet again, a fresh start of dead stops, every man for himself, and me boondocked in my own corner of this backwater, anybody's fool, running the gauntlet of self-doubt, and always the thread of things taking a turn for the worse. I look myself hard in the eye. Relax. Things are better than they've ever been. And it's true. I'm not as bad as during that spell when, stung to the quick, I felt so low. Lifting myself to the level of rock bottom was a major achievement. Yet it brings home how sad I am most days. I've taken to thinking my happiness is simply the usual sadness trimmed back to give itself space to spill, or the respite of a new cutting taking root. Get up, stretch, take the air, my friends tell me. No thanks. Come what may, I prefer to sit it out, still smarting, but something I'll deal with in my own good time, free of mind wandering, watch checking. A green thought in a green shade, put paid, or a stake in a story that never came to much. Querulous days. Abandoned fence post, North Hatley. Wasn't always like this. My friends and I could slice up a day wired, but that's as far back as I go. Breakdown set me straight, without regret or concerns about small gestures of repair. Greatest surprise came from how little I could live on. Watched my hopes shrink, unspent. At first I ran myself into the ground, trying to make sense of it, until, stumped, I reappreciated solitude. Better off alone, I go about my business. What that means is more than I care to say. Mostly I keep great conclusions at bay, stick with small matters. I know where I am with that sort of thing. Look at me when I talk to you. Stephen Brockwell, from his book Fruit Fry Geographic, 2004, ECW. We did some Stephen Brockwell last time and I messed it up royally. Let's see if I can get this one right. Meditation on the Spheres from the Home Office. Before we covered this sphere with countless clamoring bodies, with steel and concrete containers connected by ribbons of bitumen and crushed gravel, how far would a voice travel? Across what distance could I address you clearly above the din of traffic, bringing mothers home from work, of clinking wine glasses and arguments? Let me try. Stand this book on your bed, the poem vertical, the spine supporting securely this space. From the corner of the room, read these words aloud. Child and dog asleep. Alarm clock muffled under the pillow. There will be a moment when a car does not pass, when a passenger jet does not fly. The breeze brushes the spruce. You can almost hear the collisions of clouds as quiet in their path across the earth as the planets in their orbits. Proving the greatest gifts are silently given. You hear your breath. EST. My father will never taste the finest wine grown in an abandoned Tuscan vineyard. It matured in clay before the birth of Christ. He will never caress the softest skin. It belonged to a nun who would never reconcile her virtue with her beauty. He will never be moved by the most beautiful song. It was sung to put a wakeful child to sleep. The mother never wrote it down. His eyes will never fall on the most symmetrical rose. It has yet to be planted. Somewhere new genes for it are being conceived. I will never read the perfect poem. It was written by a poet who discovered her tongue before her tongue discovered her. It burned on a pyre of books in Berlin. Words, exhausted from too much talk, retire from perfection. We will sleep perfectly. Steve Venright, from the Illustrated Venright English Dictionary, a small chapbook released some years ago by Book Thug, back when they did chapbooks all the time. Ovarian, a person who plays the small organ at the anterior or ventral part of a megalithic tomb. Pandemonium, the art of stuffing a marine cephalopods with dark, glossy, iridescent tropical fruit or entrails. Quorum, any of a large group of flying mammals inclined to shrink from public attention. Rapture, the highest states of religious enlightenment, characterized by dizziness and often death. Nuevo tango, spiritual illumination by delirious fury. Thank you, Stephen. More of that one sometime. Stephen Brockwell and Peter Norman. There's a lovely little book some years ago, a chapbook called 28 Sonnets on the Sonnets, published by the Rideau Review Press, and I was lucky enough to get a copy at the Small Breast Book Fair in 2004. It seems like, a decade ago. So it's called Wild Clover Honey and the Beehive. I know bees and their possible extinction are a matter of some concern these days. I'm a bit concerned about it myself. We cannot do without bees. They keep the whole thing going, the whole nature cycle stuff. Yep, we cannot do without bees. Wild Clover Honey, Sonnet Against Sonnets by Stephen Brockwell. The gardener owes his roses to the sheep. Thin soil is best for growing grass and trees, and yet our summers seem to love the bees. Wild clover has pollen enough to keep the workers gathering while the fields are deep. Walk with them when the hay's above your knees, and watch them as they navigate the breeze. Lie in the sweet alfalfa and fall asleep. Wake up! Poets don't own their words to dreams. Roses don't grow to be set in bouquets. The bees don't make their honey for our bread. There are no trout left in the purling streams. We need to cultivate uncertainties of organic form if we hope to be fed. Now there is a point. Beehive 2, this one's composed by Peter Norman. I understood they did readings where they both sort of belted it out at each other. I wish I'd been to one of those. Beehive 2, In Defense of the Hive. Form is the most formal at its most organic. The lucky clover's quatrain, honeycomb, a sexaplexus of sextets, a poem mellifluous in rigor. That mechanic, the bee, gene-clad, industriously manic, does business by the book. Witnesses home, its blueprints inscribed on each chromosome, organic forms sculpting creative panic. So has the bee beaten uncertainty? Hell no! Surprise can hijack any hive. Astonishment lurks in each dull bouquet. A trout may swim into the hive someday. A sheep might scarf a rosebush and survive. The formal organism can surprise even the bee. So, wild clover, honey, and the beehive. See if you can find that one. Well, we've read Billy Collins a number of times on Poetry Show. Excuse my itchy eyes. I do have some kind of something or other. I've been taking antihistamines for about a month now. And Stephen Ross says he's been coughing for a month, so I think for a poet that's even worse. And I do sympathize with his predicament, as I said on Facebook today. Billy Collins, famous American poet, poet laureate, and a number of other things. Much praised and sometimes criticized. Aimless Love, new and selected poems. Collecting a number of best-ofs from earlier books, Nine Horses, Ballistics, Trouble with Poetry, Horoscopes for the Dead. And I'm going to read from the selection of new poems because they're all so darn good and so much fun. And, why not have some fun when you're dipping your toes into the culture of creativity with words? Billy certainly seems to be able to do that. The suggestion box. It all began fairly early in the day. as the coffee shop as it turned out. When the usual waitress, said, "I bet you're going to write a poem about this," after she had knocked a cup of coffee into my lap. Then later in the morning I was told by a student that I should write a poem about the fire drill that was going on as we all stood on the lawn outside the building. In the afternoon, a woman I barely knew said, "You could write a poem about that," pointing to a dirigible that was passing overhead. And if all that were not enough, a friend turned to me as we walked past a man whose face was covered with tattoos and said, "I see a poem coming." Why is everyone being so helpful? I wondered that evening by the shore of a lake. Maybe I should write a poem about all the people who think they know I should be writing poems about. It was just then in the fading light that I spotted a pair of ducks emerging from a cluster of reeds to paddle out to open water, the female glancing back over her russet shoulder just in time to see me searching my pockets for a pen. "I knew it," she quacked, with a bit of a brogue, "but who can blame you for following your heart?" she went on. "Now, go write a lovely poem about me and the mister." Okay. Here's a dark one. You don't get so many dark ones from Billy. Now this one's a dark one. Quandary. I was a little disappointed in the apple I lifted from the bowl of fruit and bit into on the way out the door. Fuzzy on the inside and lacking the snap of the ripe. Yesterday it was probably perfect, I figured, as I held it out before me. Soft red apple bearing my tooth marks, as if I were contemplating the bust of Aristotle. I considered all the people who would be grateful to have this apple, and others who might find it in their hearts to kill me before slipping it into a pocket. And I considered another slice of the world's population too, those who are shielded from anything as offensive as a slightly imperfect apple. Then I took a second bite, a big one, and pitched what was left over the tall hedges, hoping to hit on the head a murderer or one of the filthy rich out for a stroll. That's one thing about the rich. They're never filthy. No, they're not. They're usually really clean, at least on the outside. Oh yeah. Osprey. You know what they are, don't you? Oh, large brown, thickly feathered creature with a distinctive white head. You, perched on the top branch of a tree near the lake shore. As soon as I guide this boat back to the dock and walk up the grassy path to the house, before I unzip my windbreaker and lift the binoculars from around my neck, before I wash the gasoline from my hands, before I tell anyone I'm back, and before I hang the ignition key on its nail or pour myself a drink, I'm thinking vodka soda with lemon. I will look you up in my illustrated guide to North American birds, and I promise I will learn what you are called. Well, there's a promise for you. Here and there. I feel nothing this morning except the low hum of the ego, a constant, shameless sound behind the rib cage. I even keep forgetting my friend in surgery at this very hour. In other words, a perfect time to write about clouds rolling in after a week of sun, and a woman beating laundry on a rock in front of her house overlooking the sea. All of which I am making up. The clouds, the house, the woman, even the laundry. Or take the lights strung in a harbour that I once saw from the bow of a sailboat, which seemed unreal at the time and more unreal now. Even if I were there again at the ship's railing, as I am sitting here in a lawn chair, who would believe it? Vast maple tree above me, are you really there? And you, open cellar door, and you, vast sky with sun and a fading contrail. No more real than the pretend city where she lies now under the investigating lights. An imaginary surgeon busy breaking into the vault of her phantom skull. Well, doubting the reality of what is around you. A pressing metaphysical problem indeed, and one I give a certain amount of my time to. Although whether it's my time, or just, illusory time is, yet another metaphysical quandary. It's like trying to distinguish between your mind and the universal mind. I mean, how do you do it? I mean, the universal mind is everywhere, and it's got thoughts running through it like constantly, like rushing leaves in a wind, and your mind goes up and grabs a few, and you go, oh, thoughts in my mind? Oh, come on, thoughts in your mind, please. Anyway, Villanelle, and I'm so glad to see somebody's writing villanelles instead of sonnets. Will some of you please pay attention? The first line will not go away, though the middle ones will disappear, and the third, like the first, is bound to get more play. Examples of this type are written every day, and whether uplifting or drear, that first line will just not go away. It seems some lines have the right of way. It's their job to reappear. For example, the third, designed to get more play. Whether you squawk like an African grey or sing sweetly to the inner ear, the line you wrote first will just not go away. You may compose all night and day under a bare light bulb or a crystal chandelier, but by line number 3 must get more play. How can a poet hope to go wildly astray or sing out like a romantic gondolier when the first line will not go away and the third always has the final say? Yes, Billy. Not vodka and lemon? What? What? Water? I should have poured myself a beer, but I forgot. Can you imagine forgetting to pour yourself a beer on a June afternoon when you're not working? Oh, I can't imagine what you must think of me. Lines written in a garden by a cottage in Herefordshire. Indeed, by an American poet called Billy Collins. No, this time I'm not kidding around. There's some half-shattered outdoor furniture, then crowds of dianthus and pink hydrangeas, honeysuckle growing wild over the bright blue door, and zinc buckets and coal carriers overflowing with pansies, lavender, and some kind of soft fern. Just the right combination of growth and neglect. And you don't have to wish for a brick wall, a gravel path, or a leaning, disused shed to complete the picture, because they're all right here, as well as a concrete statue of a maiden holding a jug, one breast exposed, overgrown with ivy. The only thing you might not think of, being in another place so far away, is this one bee who just refused to wait for all the morning glories to unfurl in the early sun, and instead pushed her way into the white flute of the blossom, disappearing for a moment before she flew off in her distinctive gold and black uniform like a player on a team, heading over the hedge towards a core of honey. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Another poem about bees. So, a pattern there. Maybe it's subconscious. One of those Freudian things. Boys got a thing about bees, but we won't tell them till later. Keats, or How I Got My Negative Capability Back. John, I hope you're listening to this. I remember the first time I realized how lacking I was in negative capability. It was on the long slope of lawn next to a turreted stone building that housed the shenanigans of the Department of English. A professor? Some brown birds were pecking in the grass, and yet here I was, a 19-year-old too concerned with my clothes and the nervous mystery of girls to identify with this group of common sparrows another student was pointing to, let alone the nightingale we had read about, invisible in the woods of England. I was so short on empathy in those days. The only negative capability I could have possessed would be negative capability, which I could have turned into a positive had Keats not so firmly determined that regular negative capability was already a positive thing. All those birds are surely dead by now. No more hopping around in the grass of Massachusetts for them. But I'm still here this afternoon, looking at a dog asleep half under the porch. An old brown mongrel with a hoary muzzle, his paws twitching so frantically I can even see what he is dreaming as the sun helps itself down the sky. Yes, I am watching him jump a stone wall in pursuit of a darting rabbit. I'm way up on a high branch of a tree that is swaying in the wind of his dream. Nice one, Billy. The music of the spheres. The woman on the radio who was lodging the old complaint that her husband never listens to her reminded me of the music of the spheres, that chord of 7 notes, one for each of the visible planets, which has been sounding since the beginning of the universe, and which we can never hear, according to Pythagoras, because we hear it all the time. So it sounds the same as silence. But let's say the needle were lifted from the spinning grooves of those celestial orbs. Then people would stop on the streets and look up, and others would stop in the fields, and hikers would stop in the woods and look this way and that as if they were hearing something for the first time. And that husband would lower the newspaper from his face, look at his wife, who had been standing in the doorway, and ask, "Did you just say something, dear?" One last one. Orient. You are turning me like someone turning a globe in her hand. And yes, I have another side like a china no one, not even me, has ever seen. So describe to me what's there. Say what you are looking at, and I will close my eyes so I can see it too. The ox carts and all the lively flags. I love the sound of your voice, like a little saxophone telling me what I could never know unless I dug a hole all the way down through the core of myself. Well, friends, that seemed rather quick to me. Maybe because I was reading. Maybe if I'd been listening, it would have seemed interminably long. Oh God, he's still at it. You'd be saying to yourself, when's he going to stop? Well, poetry never stops. It goes on and on forever. And in the next poetry show, number 34, will feature an anthology called World Poetry, which has poems and utterances going back to a number of years BC from a number of different cultures, all of which have been translated to English, of course. And we will be able to see poets from across the centuries chatting away to each other, and hopefully a small audience here and there, as I do with you, wherever you are in the world, in the sanctuary of your dreams and your homes and your families and your desires and your loves. Goodbye, friends. Farewell. God rest ye merry gentlemen and women.